And welcome back. This is where I break down Maya and its behemoth of a user interface. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be switching off everything and bringing them back into view and explaining them as they come back. So let's go about and hide everything. So I'm going to go into Windows, UI Elements, and as you can notice, Maya has these little double lines on top of every little drop down menu. This is convenient because we can click that and Maya tears out that little drop down so we can have access to menus. So if you know you're going to be using a tool multiple times, you can have this little floaty window. Also, the great thing about this is if you have a multi-monitor setup, you can pop these menus on other monitors so you have quick, easy access to them. So I'm going to go in here and just start ticking off everything. Let's start at the top, shall we? So the status line. The status line is where we can change what tools we want to see as well as what menus we want access to. Currently, we are in the modeling menu set because as you can see here, these are the different modes Maya can work in. Just for your user experience and making life a lot easier, because if we had to have all these options open to us all the time, the UI of Maya will be even more convoluted than it already is. So currently I have modeling enabled. So if I change to a different view, you will see the ribbon on top here will change based on the context we are working. So if I jump into rigging, you'll see everything from Windows onwards changes to tools that is in regards to rigging. Now if I go to animation, you'll see that happens as well. And if I then also go back to modeling, boom, we are back into modeling options. The status line also gives us shortcut keys to save, undo, and redo, and all those good stuff, as well as selection methods or selection masks, as well as to a variety of snapping tools and a bunch of other icons we can be going into later on. The next is the shelf. So the shelf is an icon representation of what you find in the ribbon. So of course, as you can see, we've got Polygon modeling here, like we have modeling here. We've got the rigging as well as the rigging in here. And these are like the icon versions or tools that Maya has determined are most used by the set specialization or the set task. So if I go into animation, these are the kind of tools that Maya has determined as the most used tools when you are animating. So that goes the same for polygon modeling. And here you'll also see curves and surfaces, which is a different modeling method within Maya. But for now, I'm going to be leaving this menu in the polygon mode. Then we've got our time slider down here. This is where we can see where we are currently in time in our animation. So wherever what is referred to as the play it is, as you can see, I'm currently jumping from frame 25 to 26 to 27. That's where we are in time. And this also shows us our duration of our animation. Currently, we have access to 120 frames. So if we had to do an animation with the current time slider, we'll only have access to 120 frames for animation. Now we've got our range slider. Here is where we can increase our view of frames in our time slider. So if I want to see more than 120 frames, if I click the little square button here, I can increase the view. It's kind of a zooming in and out of your time slider. So if I want to focus on, say, 50 frames of my animation, I can take this guy down to, say, 50 frames. And now I will always see 50 frames. But now I can focus on, for example, on 0 to 50, or I can change it and I want to focus on, say, for example, frames 40 to 89. If I double click it, it zooms out and it displays my whole time slider of all the frames I have access to at this point in time. I'm going to be delving into these other options that you see next to the range slider, these little numbers, when we get to the animation training of the essentials. The next little UI feature that we have access to is the command line. This is where we can actually start scripting. It's referred to as MEL, which stands for Maya's embedded language. So here we can pop in commands. If we know some short scripts and stuff, we can pop them in here and have Maya do special procedures based on the mel that we input here. The next little UI element is the Helpline, which is very useful. As you can see, it popped down here, and even by hovering over the Helpline, it tells us that the Helpline is to display helps and tooltips. So if I go hover over these icons, you'll see the Helpline at the bottom of my screen. The contents of it updates depending on where I'm hovering. So if I go, for example, rigging, I can hover over these things and go in here. I can hover over the sphere primitive, the square primitive, and you'll see things popping in there and little descriptions, as well as some viewport icons here. It gives you what those icons are. So I would advise you just to hover over a few icons and just read what they are about, just as a little exploration for yourself. The last but not least is our toolbox. This is where we are greeted with the tools or the gizmos of moving elements in our viewports, as well as selection methods. So we've got our top one here, which is just a little mouse button, which is basically a click to select option. Our lasso tool, where we can draw out a selection, whatever is inside that lasso gets selected. And then last but not least is the paint selection. So when we get into more of the modeling stuff, I will explain the use of this tool. So I'm going to go back into normal click selection mode. Its shortcut key is Q on the keyboard. So that's a little hint. Again, if I hover over it, you can see select tool, Q for the shortcut key. The same for these other guys. You'll see lasso doesn't have a shortcut key, paint selection doesn't have one, but move, rotate, and scale have their designated shortcut keys. You'll also find down here we have different layouts when it comes to our viewport layout. This big open window in the center is our viewport, and this is where you will find all the sexy stuff you're going to be creating throughout the Essentials course, as well as your Maya career. So the first one is just your perspective camera. As you can see, we are into perspective camera based on a little short word down here. We can also go into our orthographics view. So I'm going to close down this UI element pop up so that I can thoroughly explain what's going on here. So I'm just going to click the little X button. Now the orthographic view comes up with 4 different viewports. As you can see, we still have access to our perspective, so we can move around and look at our models at multiple different angles as we see fit. And then we've got 3 other windows here, which are what is referred to as your orthographic views. Your orthographic views have no perspective distortion on the models. So these viewports are the viewports we use to kind of tweak things when we start getting into finessing models and animations and all that good stuff. Another great thing here is if I tap spacebar while my mouse pointer is over any one of these views, Maya will maximize that view. And as you see, when I tap it again, it goes back to the last layout we had. So if I tap there, I'm just tapping my spacebar with the mouse pointer hovering over a viewport. Now we've got another option down here which splits our viewport in 2. So again, here's one of the orthographic views and a perspective. Same thing happens if I tap my spacebar. You'll see it maximizes the view my mouse pointer is on. So I'm going to go back into my perspective. So I'm going to click this guy. Now here, as you can see, I click the button to go to perspective, but I tap my space bar, it goes back to the last viewport layout. So normally what I do is I go into my orthographic one and then just maximize the perspective one. The last little button down here is our outliner. The outliner is just the giant list of objects that you'll find in your scene. As you can see, we are currently working with a blank, fresh scene of Maya. So we only have our perspective camera, our 3 orthographics, and default light and object sets. So we never really touch those 2. We tend to finagle with the top 4. But I will get into that when we start actually manipulating objects within Maya. So to close the outliner, I click the little button in here and it closes it down. So that's the toolbar covered. Now you're probably wondering, what is this little window on the side here? As you can see, there's 3 tabs here. When it comes to the channel box, it is context sensitive in the sense of depending on what I have selected in my viewport, the information changes in here. We also have display layers, which we'll get into when we start modeling, as well as an animation tab, which we will also get into more depth when we start covering animations. For the majority of the time, you're going to be spending between these two tabs. You're going to be having the display one open the majority of the time. We also have access to our modeling toolkit. These are tools that Autodesk has deduced to be the most used or most commonly used tools when it comes to the modeling phase of a 3D project. And last but not least, we got our attribute editor. This is also context sensitive, and the context changes depending on what I have selected inside of my viewport. So I'm going to jump back into my channel box, and as you can see, when I jump between these tabs, the icons on top highlight. So there is my channel box, there is my modeling toolkit, and there is my attribute editor. Another tool option that we're going to have here is the character setup tools, but we are not going to be covering this at this point. This is much later in the essentials. And then we also have, I just want to go back to channel, and last but not least, we got tool settings. So with this window, depending on what tool I have, as you guys can recall here on the left of the screen, this can change and we can edit how that tool works. So I've got marquee selection, we've got our paint selection, we've got our move tool, we've got our rotate tool, and we've got our scale tool. So when you find that one of your tools in your toolbar is not complying or acting like it's supposed to, you will open up the tool settings and just click the reset option in here so that Maya can reset the tool to its defaults so that you can get back into the swing of things and carry on working. So I'm going to end off this lesson here. In the next lesson, I'm going to go over how you can customize Maya's user interface so that you can lay it out in the way that suits your workflow. So catch you in the next lesson.